So I come from a legal background, so my questions would be whatever question I'm going to be putting to these two gentlemen. I would try to understand legality and then the technology they use in their day-to-day business. So, and coming into the, passing of this law, DPDP Act 2023 by Government of India, and then these rules, draft rules, which have been come into for a consultation, for the public consultation. I just want to understand the background and then the set stage for this. Given the increasing volume of digital transactions, how can we ensure the continued security and integrity of the system? This is to Mr. Malhotra.
Talking about the security aspects, how do we ensure that if we have multiple such transactions and several of those, how do we make sure that all the transactions are secured and we get the proper reconciliation done? In this case, from the technology point of view, from the security perspective, we have to make sure that all the systems are protected and secure all the time, which means that we have to perform regular audits. There has to be proper security testings that has to be performed on all the systems that are managing these digital transactions, which includes the vulnerability assessment as well as the penetration testing. Then you have to have regular audits. All the things, all the risks that you have identified, you have to perform audits to check if there is any residual risk and fix those risks as and when they have been identified. Talking about some more controls when it comes to transactions, you must have some kind of end-to-end encryption. There are some newer form of encryptions also that have come, like homomorphic, where you do not have to decrypt the data to basically make sense out of it or do some kind of processing. Then there are several other aspects when it comes to managing the security of the transactions. You have to be you have to have a proper threat intelligence, which means that what kind of threats are impacting your assets or the systems which are managing those digital transactions. So based upon the analysis that you have done, you have to respond accordingly, which means that there has to be a proper incident response as a function within the company, so that any threat that has been identified or if it has materialized, then in that case you have a team responding to those security incidents, if at all, within appropriate time. So yeah, I mean, these are some important aspects that I believe which are required for us to respond to any kind of a situation, as well as make sure that all the transactions that are happening on these platforms, on these systems, they are secured, considering the volume. The other part I want to emphasize here is the role that artificial intelligence is playing to make sure that these transactions are secure because of the volume
Right.
of the transactions. Artificial intelligence, and we are going to be discussing that maybe later in the session. Because of the volume of the transactions that are coming through, the role that artificial intelligence, that it is going to be playing a vital role, in the sense that because of the complexity of the transaction, the volume and the speed at which they are coming, artificial intelligence is very important, including the security awareness that we have to provide to people who are managing those systems which are performing those many number of transactions.
Right, sir. So thank you for the very insightful response. Just a quick supply question attached to this is, you mentioned that it is, audit has to be there in the regular course, and then all the security measures which is to be taken care should also be implemented. So does that mean it's an ongoing continuous process that has to be done, regularly without there being, once it's not like you have designed some policy, you have put in place some systems and then you rest, you don't look at it. So I understand it's a continuous ongoing process.
It's absolutely a continuous process because there are several integrations that happen between various systems to make these transactions happen.
Right.
And these integrations, they have to be tested on regular basis. You must have some internal processes to test these these integration as well as the applications behind, plus you must have some kind of an assurance from external parties, right?
Right.
So that you can invite them in and have and perform their independent assessment against the audit or the internal practices that you have or actions that you have performed to make sure that the transactions are going through with proper security and integrity. So it has to be a regular process which must be reviewed on frequent basis.
Right, sir. Thank you for the very interesting and elaborating response to question, sir. So my next question is directed towards Abhishek Bali, sir. So, sir, Mr. Bali, what role does technology play in enhancing the security measures such as AI-powered fraud detection or a blockchain tech?
So, sorry. So, when it comes to technology, technology is not just important, at least when it comes to the India use case or India reality from the perspective of security, but to ensure security at the right cost. See, if you look at, this was a point that we were talking about just before this, if you look at the US or you look at EU or you look at even the Middle East, the average value per customer, the average transaction value per customer is relatively high, which means you can spend more money on securing the transaction, on ensuring you have, your fraud monitoring capabilities, on ensuring that there is security. But if you look at Africa, you look at India, you look at Southeast Asia, our transaction sizes are much lesser. Sometimes 1/10, even lesser. If you look at UPI today, you're doing 5 rupees, 10 rupees, 15 rupees, 20 rupee transactions, and you have to secure all of them. It's not like you can say, okay, I will only do fraud monitoring for those transactions which are above 1,000 rupees.
Correct.
You have to do it even for a 2 rupee transaction. So technology is important because especially our frugal innovation approach to technology, thanks to which we've built institutions like ISRO and others, that is very important because then it can ensure that rather than spending dollars on securing every account, you can spend pesas, a few pesas to secure every account. So technology is important, one, to ensure at the cost level. Now let's talk about AI. We are all currently very interested in AI because of, let's be very honest, it's because of ChatGPT. Okay, it took us all by storm 1 year or 1 year and 2 months or 1 year and 3 months ago. And since then, everybody said AI is going to solve everything in the world, and it is a great starting point. But the fact of the matter is today, it takes 10 times the amount of cost to run one query on ChatGPT as compared to doing the same thing on Google search. So it is 10 times more expensive. What that means is, if we start applying AI to every transaction or every activity, your cost will go through the roof, number one. Secondly, we aren't producing so much hardware to be able to support so much AI. You can't run AI on your laptop. You can't run it on a normal server. You have to have very expensive GPU servers. We don't have access to it. I mean, NVIDIA sells them for $2.5 lakh for one GPU. We don't have that kind of, in many cases, we don't even have that kind of money or others. So AI is going to be very important when we are very selective about it, where we are doing, say, for example, pattern analysis. If we are doing post-event analysis, AI is going to be very important as in terms of model development. But I don't think it is very cost-effective right now, unfortunately. It is not cost-effective for most organizations in this country to start deploying AI for every transaction and every activity. We are still some time away from that. In fact, we don't even produce so much energy. If you look at Microsoft and AWS today, they are currently doing private deals to set up their own nuclear power plants. Because the US doesn't have so much energy to power AI models,
Right.
let alone India. So I think AI is going to be very important, and technologies are going to be very important to reduce the cost of compliance, fraud monitoring, security and others. It's very important that we do it. And AI is going to be very important for certain use cases, but it's not a blanket approach that we can end up taking today. It may change in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sir, I just wanted, because you talked about the importance of AI, I just wanted to highlight few use cases in this case.
Please, sir.
Because of the sheer volume of the data that we have, it is not humanly possible for us to make sense out of it. So for us to do a proper pattern analysis of so many transactions that are happening, so much data that is coming in, I think we have to somewhere rely on artificial intelligence to understand the complexity and draw some kind of a pattern out of it, so that it can properly and successfully identify any kind of a misbehavior or suspicious activity. At the same time, it will be able to flag it, not only flag it, but also alert, in my opinion, at the appropriate time. The other important aspect in the case of artificial intelligence is that it is self-learning. That as much data that you provide to some of these models, in due course of time, they will be able to learn from the data as well as the inferences that they have been able to draw. So it is self-learning model, and it will evolve in due course of time, resulting in lesser number of false positives. So one more aspect in the case of artificial intelligence is that it will be able to also understand and learn from the evolving threats. It is also important for us to make it learn from the threats that are identified, that have been reported in the industry. So it may sometimes be humanly impossible for a person or a team to do so many things, where we have to rely on some of artificial intelligence capabilities to move, such heavy load. So AI is going to be here and is going to be, in my opinion, a game changer.
Right. Thank you, sir. So it could sound very basic question, but it came to my mind while hearing you, both of you. So when we use AI for all these security measures to be taken, and I understand there would be all the concern and all the security measures would have been taken when we are dealing with the AI. So do we also expose ourselves for a data breach through AI systems when we deploy them? Is there any possibility you see?
There are definitely, there are risks related to any new technology that you adopt, and as Abhishek was mentioning, AI has just been, people have
evolving,
started to adopt it
Yeah.
in such a way that they have not been able to capture so much, they have not been able to understand everything of it, but they are trying to get the best as much as possible. But having said that, there are definitely guardrails that are available. There are best practices that are available. There are frameworks that have been defined now by some of in the industry, which basically give you the best practices when it comes to adopting any of these artificial intelligence technologies. So you have to, again, the same thing is, you have to understand what this artificial intelligence hype is about, why do I want to use it, and where do I want to implement. This is very important. We cannot just go blind on it and think of implementing everywhere. We have to understand what is it that it is going to giving me, and where do I have to implement that. Once you have a proper scope ready, in that case, I believe you will be able to design a good solution for yourself. Right. That will have some kind of a security by design.
So take home for me is to use any technology, be it AI or other, judicially. So it has to be seen whether it's required, and all these security measures and
exactly. What purpose it is solving for you? But please.
No, so I was just saying there are 2 points that I'd like to just add to that. Is number one is when we think about AI, we have to talk about, is the AI model and application deployed on our environment, or are we using it as an API, as an application which is from a third party or a vendor? Because when it comes to potential data breaches or using our data as a derived input, it can happen in the latter, because my information is effectively potentially going out.
Okay.
Right. So then we have to ensure or get assurance from the vendor or supplier or the provider that okay, my data is not being misused. So in the case of, again, I'm going to go back to ChatGPT. When you put in a prompt, you're effectively, that information is going to ChatGPT and giving you something back. A lot of the AI models, if you're deploying in your environment, which is completely secured, you have complete control over it, that potentiality is far lesser. That's one. The second point is, when we look at deploying AI models, and we deploy them for our applications, whether it's for anti-money laundering or fraud or forensic or others, we take the standard. There is an acronym that we use called EARS, EARS. Any AI model should be explainable, should be able to explain how it works. It's not some black box approach. A is auditable, which means I can audit all the steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. R is repeatable. If I give the same input, it should give me the same output. You will see, in fact, if you use some of these Claude or use ChatGPT or use something else, you put in one input today, it will give you a different output tomorrow. So it doesn't follow the repeatability requirement. And S is scalable. Means if I'm using it for 5 things or 5 million things, it should perform at the same level. So when we are talking about, especially when we talk about cybersecurity or data security or anti-money laundering, these highly regulatory driven spaces, we look at these 4 conditions when trying to deploy safe AI models.
All right. Thank you, Bali sir. So another follow-up question on this. As we understand, AI is as a technology is also been considered by some states where they have said they welcome AI, and some states within the EU itself they have passed the laws. They don't accept it as such. So when we go and buy, as an Indian company, I consider it for an example. It's a hypothetical question, any of you can answer. Say I buy some AI solution or some technology, yes, for my purposes to manage my data, whatever the processes I need it, and I am entering into a contract with that company. If that company, though they are selling a solution to me, but where that company is based, that state has not approved the AI, and we in India have a contract with them, and something for hypothetically is some breach has happened. So how do you see that? So that state where the company is registered, ultimately you cannot sue a technology. Ultimately you will identify a company, and there would be a contract between you and that company. So how do you see that to resolve this? In any case, say that company say that where I am registered, where I am located, this law does not apply. You have taken your own decision to buy this product from me. So how do you see this jurisdictional issues when you go in and enter into contract with this kind of company? Solution is good. You are fine. You are ready to buy a thing. But how do you see if this kind of possibility happens in future? Yes.
Absolutely. That's yeah.
Buying and selling is out of contract. By virtue of a contract, then you would have a specific clause in a contract which will specify the jurisdiction and the governing law.
I was just about to say the same thing. It's part of the due diligence that you have to perform while contracting with the company. Again, you have to understand what your requirements are, and if the requirement is that your data or the data that you are using to test data that you are using to train the model, if it has to reside within some boundaries within India, then it has to be part of the contract only. It cannot be after the fact, because then, as he rightly mentioned, it becomes a legal issue for you to basically decide out in a court of law.
Right.
I think there are some parallels we can draw, at least to the question. This has happened many times in different industries in the past. A great example of that, I don't know how many of you have used it. I used to use it very extensively, Pirate Bay, where you download pirated software, video games, everything else, right? Exactly. For the longest time, Pirate Bay, the Americans were very, very concerned because their entire industry was getting hammered because of Pirate Bay, because that was based in some Nordic country. So it was not. They just said, listen, we are doing it online, and we don't have a headquarter here in the US. You can stop us if you want to. They would block one domain, they would set up in another domain, and a third domain, and a fourth domain. So that was one. In banking it happens a lot. I mean, tax havens are exactly that.
Right.
A tax haven says, I don't need to tell you who owns this account, who owns this company, the money is coming in, I will not tell you where it is coming from. The problem with tax havens is exactly what you're talking about right now, which is the non-adherence to certain common minimum denominator of laws to protect yourself. So this data localization today as a norm has come in because they saw these issues with and parallels with other industries, tax havens being one of them. today actually India is taking advantage of the grayness of our DPDP Act, because a lot of processing of other countries' data happens in India. Because you've got relatively inexpensive talent, you've got lots of engineering talent, the processing can happen here, and it's absolutely fine. So when we talk about these laws, first of all, when it comes to anti-money laundering laws, nuclear laws, environmental laws, many of these, what is happening is a lot of countries are coming together and they're agreeing to common minimum denominator of laws so that this does not happen. And my sense is the same thing is going to happen with AI, where generally there's going to be a common minimum denominator of laws, because AI is being treated exactly the same way by the EU as the nuclear laws were concerned. EU, before they could make any big developments and innovations in AI, decided to regulate it because they're concerned.
That's the second time when the EU has adopted that approach. The first time
Sir,
when they have adopted
sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt. So we'll take the questions post this. I mean, this is over. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I was just wanting to say the same thing, that if you are, yeah, if you are an entity that is bound by some kind of a regulations, these are some important aspects that you have to consider before going into any kind of a business transaction as part of the contract.
Right. So this is the topic which can take the entire day. So we should keep that for the further discussion post session. So I'll move to my next question then. It's directed towards Mr. Bali. So sir, how can we strike a balance between a convenience and a security in digital payments? How do you see that?
I think in India we've actually done a very good job of that, to be honest. If you travel across the world, the quality, convenience of our payments and our financial services is probably second to none in the world. So there is a lot that we have to learn here. I mean, for anybody who travels abroad here to the US, or goes to the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, if you went to the EU and you sent out a check today to be cleared, it could take you up to a week for the check, even in today's day, to be cleared. No IRTGS, no IMPS. In many cases, there's one way of transaction. So there is a lot to be learned from the India experience when it comes to convenience. Now let's talk about security, which is a separate issue. What ends up happening is, first of all, in most organizations, the departments and teams managing security, compliance, AML, fraud, forensic, almost have very little interaction with the business and digital transformation guys. You'll be very surprised. It happens in very few organizations where both of them actually sit together before they're deciding a user journey or a payment journey. So what happens is, first the digital people or the business guys end up designing the entire product. It's a beautiful product. It's supposed to work very well. And then once they've designed it, they've worked all the kinks and everything else, then come the legal, compliance, AML, fraud, forensic, other guys, and they say, nay, it can't happen like this. We have to add these 25 other, 30 other safeguards. It slows down the entire thing. So I think the big thing to learn here, number one, is infrastructure and tech first, number one. Secondly, these two teams have to sit together. In fact, a unified approach when you're designing or managing a product is very important. They cannot be adversarial. That's number two. And third is, of course, you have to keep a track on a regular basis what the performance of your customer experience is right now. Which, if you go to anywhere else in the world, like I said, takes, even today, if you go to certain parts of the world, it takes 30 days to open an account. So, and that is primarily because the business people have a very different set of priorities, and the compliance and legal people have a very different set of priorities. Technology can solve it. If they both sat together and actually sat down and regulators sat down, they can solve it. It's just that they're adversarial in nature. That has been at least my big learning.
I just wanted to add
Please.
that. You mentioned about convenience and security. I mean, it's a balance that you have to basically strike, because you also have to make it a frictionless kind of an experience for a user. And that is where, when you talked about the convenience, I mean, there are a few things that you have to keep in mind. That whenever you are defining some kind of security requirements, then you should be defining them in a very clear and concise manner. so that it is easy for any person who is reading it as a user to understand it properly and execute. Third, I would believe is that you have to basically tell clearly what kind of information that you are collecting from the user, so that there is an absolute transparency, right? So once you have done that, I believe to a larger extent, the convenience part is taken care of, that the person is understanding how to, and one important aspect there as well is that you should allow the customer or a user to customize or change the security settings to the requirements based upon the risk appetite of the user as well. So these are few things that will help make the user experience better. And on the security part, yes, I mean, we definitely have to have the proper understanding of the business and the transactions that are happening, based upon which we have to continuously innovate on the security aspects as well, because there are threats, new threats always coming in. We have to understand those threats and define new controls and countermeasures so that security is also taken care of. But one very thin line here is that you have to maintain a balance, because if you have very strict security controls which are very difficult to not only implement but understand, user experience will not be as good as it should be.
Right. Great response and supplements on this. So with this, I move to my next question. And this is directed to Mr. Malhotra. So what are the key challenges in implementing the robust data security measures for digital payment platforms, sir? Key challenges in the implementing the robust data security measures for digital payments platforms.
Oh, absolutely. There are several challenges as such. There are, new vulnerabilities all the time coming. Right. Okay, there are attacks getting more and more sophisticated. There are repeated attacks or attempts that are being made to exploit those vulnerabilities as such. Then there is insider threat. It's a very, very important aspect, that you have people inside the company who actually can do some mistake sometime, which could result in some kind of a data breach. So these are some very important aspects that we have to consider, while managing this data security.
Right. So my next question is to Mr. Bali. Sir, how can we address the issue of data breaches and protect the consumer data from unauthorized access?
The underlying principle here, whether it is data breaches or whether it is fraud or anything else, is that this is a game of cops and robbers. And the robbers are almost always more motivated than the cops. Right? So you are always playing catch up. That mentality has to exist in the team, the setup that is there in any organization which is forward looking on these areas. You have to assume, you should be humble and assume that somebody out there is smarter and more motivated at being a bad person than you are at being a good person. That is very important for us to deeply understand, and it is not going to change irrespective of how many notches up in IQ you get. Number one. Secondly, when it comes to data breaches, and I can tell you from one, at least the limited experience that I have is, almost all serious data breaches happen because of human error / stupidity. Any major one. Right? The reason is because if you look at the people who are motivated to do data breaches, or in a sense because they want to, like they say, they want to make money out of it, ransom, they want to, impact your reputation. Bad actors who are sitting anywhere else in the world target those where they get the greatest ROI. This is very important. Which means if I have 20 companies that I can potentially target, the only thing that I have is time that I have to spend. So I am going to look at those 20 companies from the lens of saying, where is it that my effort of say 1 month can give me the highest return? So if you generally make it difficult for people, just like if you had a house with very high gates, spikes, 3 dogs inside and others, the return on investment for a person who's doing this, they think and they look at another organization and say maybe it's better to go in that direction than in this direction. So the 2 things I would like to say is here, before I pass on the question, is 1, in most cases it is because something fundamental has not been taken care of. Like for example, your simple things like somebody has gotten an exception of changing their passwords in an organization, where you should be changing them every 30 days, 45 days. Somebody will come in and say, no, I don't want to change it, it's too difficult for me. And the vulnerability starts there. Or something very simple. Or people have just handed over their password to a second person, or they've given their logins for an internal application that nobody's worried about. Or people have hard-coded the password of their database and deployed it on Git, which is a public database. Simple things. They're not very complicated. That ends up leading to most issues, number 1. And number 2 is, if you don't look like an organization that has these security safeguards measures, you become very attractive for somebody targeting you. Those would be my level pointers before I sort of
just
move on.
one important aspect I
Please.
wanted to highlight in this case is that you're talking about data security. Now in this case, one very important point is that only collect the necessary amount of data. That if you're collecting huge amount of data that you don't need, then you're spending more resources and money to basically protect and secure the data. So that's very important. And then put right kind of access control on the minimum amount of data that you have collected, which is required for you to perform that business function. So once you have that bare minimum amount of data collected, put access control, put all those other security controls that you want to put in, like encryption and tokenization and everything that you would like to put in to secure the data. But make sure that you are collecting what is required. So that's what I think everything else he covered, but there was one point I wanted to highlight.
Right, sir. So what I understand is that even though you have implemented best of security measures, there has to be constant discipline to, keep on, just as he suggested, to keep on, changing the password as and when suggested, duration, all those duration when it is popped up, or there should be, no casual approach towards to taking all these
Again,
steps.
Sandeep, it has to be all risk-based. Okay, what kind of transaction that you are trying to secure, it has to be risk-based. What kind of risk are associated with it? Similarly, you will change your settings on the control side as well. For example, if it's a very big transaction, high transaction that is happening, you will do risk-based authentication in the sense that, you will put in, you will ask more, authentication and more stringent authentication mechanisms like multi-factor and things like that, or for that matter, biometric to happen. Again, it's risk-based on what kind of transactions. If it is a low risk, a transaction, then simple PIN, or for that matter, a password would do. But again, it's a trade-off that you have to do based upon the risk that you have identified in that transaction.
Right.
Sorry, if I can just give an example on
Please.
this, is the fundamentals and basics. There's a very famous case that happened about 5-6 years ago. Somebody went and stole about 120 or $160 million from the Bank of Bangladesh over a weekend. And how they were able to do that was because one of their printers, which prints the request demand, was not working. So because the printer was not working and the printer didn't work for 3-4 days, nobody knew that a transaction like that has taken place or is being requested. Transaction went through. They only realized after 4 days that the transaction has gone by because the one printer was not working. So there are also many other examples that you will find, and when you look retrospectively, you think about it, you're like, how can somebody be so lackadaisical? Basic things. People have lost data, in this country for that matter, people have lost data because some developer engineer internally made the database public. And somebody who was very, very committed went out, extracted all the data, put it up on the dark web, sold it for $50,000 or $100,000 to 10 different providers. It's happened recently. So many of the basics, and he's absolutely right, the risk-based approach is very critical, because if you start securing everything, you'll exhaust all your resources.
It will not be cost effective in that case, and it will not be frictionless as well.
Right.
Because if you have to follow several steps to do a very simple and low risk transaction, then that's not a good experience that you're giving, and you're wasting your time.
Right. So that leads us to our last and final question, which I'll be putting to both of you gentlemen. And before I put that, I just want to give a little bit of background of the laws and the regulations we have in India. See, if we all in this room will agree that all the laws in India are basically, so far as where consumers are related, are consumer centric. All the regulation, if you'll say consumer laws or broadcasting laws, so the paramount focus is on the consumers. So how do you see, both of you gentlemen, how can we empower consumers to protect themselves from online scams and fraudulent activities?
If you have to talk about empowering customers, first of all, when it comes to laws, we are a great nation. We make lots of great laws. We often just don't implement them or regulate them very well. So we are very good at making laws. Some of our laws are beautiful. But the problem is, when it comes to empowering a customer, the most important thing is education. Now, today, for example, if I am a child in school, there is almost no formal education I get on securing my data, on managing social media, on making sure that I don't get hurt online. Almost none, right? If we end up doing, if schools can mandate karate classes in the morning, then I don't understand why we can't mandate this as well, because there is a far greater chance that you will be hurt online today than you will be hurt offline. So
Absolutely.
Education is extremely important, number one. Number two is, you are going to actually see the empowerment is going to become a lesser bit of problem as our population ages. We still have the demographic dividend, but it's not going to last for very long. In about 30 years, we will probably have the largest, if not the second largest, the largest retiree population in the world.
I see.
And elder fraud is going to become a big issue. The problem there is going to be when we talk about empowerment, it's not going to be about education. It's going to be about the ease and enablement and having intermediaries in the middle who can secure you on your behalf, right? So I think it's going to be a mix of education for the youth, the younger people, the school and others.
Right.
But as people get older, they don't need education so much as they need assistance.
Right.
And there the empowerment will happen when there is a regulator, when there is an agency. Today, for example, you go to the cyber cell of any police or any regulator, it's not a great experience.
Absolutely, I agree.
I had to submit recently a cyber complaint. They asked me to first put it down on a paper, stamp it. Then, this is me going to a cyber cell. They're asking me to stamp it, sign it, go. Then 7 days later, I get a call from the local thana saying, "Can you please shut down the complaint? We have taken the action." I don't know what action they've taken. Now, that is me, who's very committed now, to doing this. So if it is an older person, there's no way. So I think having the right agencies, having the right regulators, having the right people to support people who are then 50 plus, 60 plus, that's going to be very important. Those are the two things, in my opinion.
And especially in the country where our kids are exposed to open technology, they have access to all. In some of the countries, we have heard that Australia have put some age bar that they've been stopped to use social media.
It's not going to work. The VPN is everywhere. It's not. If you can get, kids are much sharper than whatever regulations you put in. So, social media, unfortunately, and the dirty side of the internet is a horse that has bolted the door. You can't pull it back in now. Now what you can do is educate, provide safe environments, have this thing in place. Just like we do, the same thing has happened, say for example, with what has happened with smoking and alcohol, and to a certain extent in certain countries, drugs. You can't we've tried creating dry states in this country. We all know what happens there. So education, having the right infrastructure is now, that horse is already bolted. It's already done.
Mr. Malhotra, your response on
Same
that?
thing, I mean, you have to improve the communication here and make them know what their rights are. So that's, I think, we covered. Education, educating them is very, very critical. Make them aware of their rights, put privacy policies on your portals and things like that so that they can read and get aware of what the rights are. Yeah, that's it.
So, do you also agree to this that it's a job of all of us as a company, all the stakeholders should take initiative in this?
Absolutely,
So far
sir,
as the
yeah.
consumer
Because
awareness
of,
and
he talked about regulations also. It makes us even more responsible to basically educate and tell to people, what are we doing and keep everything transparent.
yes. With this, I think we have finished our question session. Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for your time and then response.
Thank you.
To share our experiences while we are trying to solve our problems using AI and also leverage the industry knowledge as well as the information sharing. So one important aspect I also wanted to highlight was that information sharing in this case is very important, that you learn from us and we learn from you. So that is where definitely we would like to come and work closely and absolutely.
Kind of a platform where
Yes.
problems can be given out to all the solvers.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a loaded question because you actually asked a lot of things here, because you are trying to ask that what all can go wrong when we are using something as new and innovative like artificial intelligence, right? And there are so many different ways of using it. The best way to answer this question is, there will be a different answer for every use case as such, but I would say that you have to have a proper policy and a framework defined within your entity, within an organization, on how we want to adopt such new technologies and where do you want to implement it, followed by the responsible use. And you also have to have a proper security awareness being provided to your people as well as all the employees that are using these new technologies on how to responsibly use them, and so that it does not result in any kind of a breach. But again, there are several use cases that we can define in this case, as per which there will be a different risk, and that has to be handled in a different way. Every risk that actually it may pose, or any such new technology that may pose, it will require a different approach to every use case. But again, you must have some kind of policy framework which defines the intent of the management on how we want this technology to be used, this service to be used within the company, within the organization. You have to make everyone aware about the policy, as well as what is the objective, what is that we are trying to achieve by using this technology within the company, what is the end goal, and ensure that you use it responsibly. This is on the higher level that I can answer, but every use case will have a different answer based upon the risk that it is posing to us.
Almost.
I would not. Yes, go ahead. Maybe an offline discussion, but yeah.
Yeah, we can take the discussions offline. I'm sorry, people are waiting for the next session. So,
We just wanted to complete the
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please.
Thanks. Every transformative technology in the beginning first gets misused, and everybody gets worried about it. Historically this has been the case. I don't see why this is going to be different with AI, just because we have the regulations in place. So, and everybody looks at it as the end of the world. So we should expect that to happen, and it is anyway happening. Deepfakes is one example of it, but you're absolutely right. The second part so we have to assume that sense of ambiguity when it comes to this technology is going to remain for some time. That's number one. When it comes to uniqueness of ID that you brought up, the first check was made on the back of a cow, where the person transacting the cow for, say, something else basically made the check or the transaction on the side of the cow, because that was because there were limited number of cows in the village, and that entire structure was unique, therefore, for hundreds of kilometers around. So they thought of it as unique. Same as with the use of second names. Use of a second name is a relatively unique phenomena, which was created because it was an ID. Your first name plus last name was unique in a sense. Then we started moving to other things. the Native Americans used to have tattoos that were unique for every person because that was an ID. It was also a sense of your reputation. So now we can't use those because technology has moved over, the number of people have moved over, our sense of what is unique has changed. It's going to happen with our IDs also. It's going to happen with our IDs. At one point in time, we didn't have so many IDs in this country. I mean, this is a relatively recent phenomena. Before that, people never thought it was important. So when it comes to signatures, and I hope signature goes away because my signatures don't match at all. It's a terrible thing for me. I get palpitations while going to a bank because I know my check is not going to match. So whether it's that, whether it's other things, we are going to come up with new norms. I mean, in his space, for example, your encryption norms are no longer the same because of quantum computing. They can just get broken. So we are going to see new ID norms, and we are going to see ambiguity when it comes to AI. And it's just something that we'll have to, unfortunately, live with for the time being. So
Just last 5 seconds. It's just that the risk will generally come first and then the mitigation thereafter. Okay. So in the case of AI also, every use case that can be misused and is going to cause a risk, mitigation I believe will slightly come thereafter, but definitely and surely will come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.